Hi, and welcome to Mondays with Skift Airline Weekly. I'm your host, Madhuni Christian, the editor of Skift Airline Weekly, and I'm joined today by the one and only, the legendary Jay Shabbat, senior analyst and co-founder of Airline Weekly. Jay, good morning.
Good morning, Madhu.
Although I guess on the East Coast it's afternoon for you.
Afternoon, yep, lunchtime.
But before we get started, I want to tell all our listeners that we will take your questions. Just use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. We will also be posting a replay of this this live stream on airlineweekly.com, and we'll distribute it as a podcast on iTunes and Spotify and wherever you get your podcast. Jay, that was quite an issue we put out last night.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. We're rolling through earnings, second quarter earnings season, which it's probably the wrong term because there are no earnings.
Right.
It's more let's call them financial results, financial carnage. But always never a dull moment in the airline industry. Action-packed issue.
No, absolutely. And the week before we put out a kind of a behemoth of an issue, which was about the U.S., mainly the U.S. Airlines. Most of the U.S. carriers and Boeing had reported their results a couple of weeks ago, but now it's Europe's turn, and that's what was the focus of this week's feature story, which you wrote, and wanted to just dive into that a little bit. So Jay, there are reports. We've all seen the pictures in the news, and we hear about how Europeans are going on their beach holidays again, while us in the States are kind of trapped at home, depending on the state. So what does that mean for the airline industry? Are airlines seeing the benefits of that travel that their counterparts in the U.S. are not?
Yeah, well, they're getting. I mean, it started a little bit later in Europe. I mean, in the U.S., sort of earlier in the let's call it late spring, early summer, May, June. You started to see demand to beach markets like Florida kind of increasing in the U.S. And then the European airlines really didn't get started until mid-June. Everything was pretty much grounded before that. And then after the June restart, mid-June restart, by July and early August, we're seeing sort of this U.S. demand has slowed somewhat because of the COVID spike in the Sun Belt and whatnot. Europe has I don't want to say taken off. That's kind of too strong a term, but there has been some green shoots. Can we use that term? And it's been encouraging, beneficial. But there have been some COVID spikes, not on the order of U.S. magnitude, but in terms of number. But there have been some increases in caseloads throughout Europe. So there's some questions now whether or not maybe the same thing that happened in the U.S. will repeat in Europe, where it'll just be just kind of fizzle out. Everybody's kind of watching that. There have been some signs of that already. Spain has had a big increase in cases, and the U.K. has slapped quarantine rules on people coming back from Spain. So it's a very tentative mini recovery, you might say.
There's a couple things I wanted to ask you about. One is that, so Europeans are traveling more, but there's also been a push from, well, I guess let's back up. Have airlines seen the benefits of this travel? I mean, there's been a push from some governments and even populations to take more train journeys. So my first question is, are airlines reaping the benefits of all this travel, or is it not as much as you'd expect in a normal year?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's nothing even close to normal. A carrier like Ryanair or EasyJet or Wizz Air, they're starting to fill their planes, and they're operating many fewer planes, they're operating many fewer frequencies. I'm sure the yields. I mean, surprisingly, the yields from what some of these airline CEOs say are not that bad. I mean, people are paying decent fares, but it's no one's really making money. I mean, there may be flights here and there that are covering. I mean, most of the airlines say they're covering their direct cash costs. There may be some genuinely profitable flights here and there, but I mean, you have to remember too that these airlines are operating such subscale networks because so many fleets, so many of the planes are grounded, utilization so low that the economics that are required for them to make money, they're just not there right now. So we're really making money in the true sense of the world, the true sense of the word or term is that's sort of something for another day. But airlines are certainly benefiting from the just being able to get planes started again, getting some people back to work, getting some cash in the door, they're definitely benefiting. So the longer term question that you raised is whether more people will take trains rather than planes, and some of those bigger questions. But that's going to play out in 2021 and beyond. We don't really have a good sense of that yet.
Well, Mr. Anonymous or Ms. Anonymous here has asked a question that preempted the question I was going to ask you, Jay, which is LCCs versus network carriers. Which has the competitive advantage in Europe, I assume, under the current circumstances?
Yeah, it's very different in the U.S. and Europe. So the U.S., the we call them the big three, Delta, American, United. Those are very domestically, I mean, they're international airlines, but their domestic networks are extremely large, extremely strong, and for the last few years, extremely profitable, even more so than international. And they have these routes, remember that domestic for the U.S. can be long haul too. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're flying from San Francisco to New York, that's a long flight, and people will pay for premium services and things. So the big three, call them legacy carriers, whatever you want to call them, they're very active in those big domestic markets. Europe, it's a very different story. Most of the routes within Europe are very, very short haul. People really won't pay for premium. It's a carrier like Lufthansa, the big three in Europe, Lufthansa, IAG, and Air France, KLM. The vast majority of their revenues and their profits in normal times come from long haul. So short haul has always been even in the best of times, short haul is a big challenge for these carriers. So if you look at the European big three relative to, let's call them the LCC big three, EasyJet, Wizz Air, Ryanair, if you want to throw Norwegian in there, a few smaller players, those LCCs are going to be better positioned because as the short haul markets come back, these are all short haul airlines. I mean, these are 100% short haul airlines. So it's almost, you could think of it as like for an Air France, short haul is almost an afterthought, whereas for an EasyJet, it's everything. Right. You can lose a lot of money. I mean, Air France lost 200 million euros or whatever they said it was on just French domestic markets. So you can lose a lot, but you're never really going to make that much. So there's just a more direct answer to the question. The LCCs are actually very well positioned. I mean, Wizz Air and Ryanair are actually they still intend to take a lot of the planes they have on order. Their capacity is down now, but probably won't be too long before they start growing again. So they're sort of feeling, even though they're not immune from the near term pain, they're sort of feeling good about their position, over the next year, 2, 3, 4 years.
And for the purposes, to clarify when you say domestic, right? I mean, KLM technically really has no domestic market, but we can consider sort of the Schengen area as its domestic market, right, Jay?
Yeah, I mean, you can define it different ways depending on what you're talking about. When I mentioned that Air France is losing 200 million euros in the domestic market, I'm talking about the domestic market.
Right,
I mean, it's literally within France. Right. Yeah.
But France and the Netherlands, I mean, there's a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. KLM doesn't have a domestic market. A lot of these countries don't. Some domestic markets are bigger than even the UK domestic market it's very, very small. Right. The German domestic market is bigger, but still, it's you're not talking about the U.S. market. So you could, if you want, for comparable purposes, you could define domestic as intra-European, but. You might just want to use the term short haul versus long haul.
Now, this brings up an interesting question though. What does it mean for carriers like Lufthansa, which for the last Lufthansa mainline, and we'll talk about Lufthansa's ever-growing family of carriers, and brands, but Lufthansa mainline, the Stork. For the last decades or so has really staked its fortunes on premium long haul intercontinental flights, and those are gone. So what does this How's this dynamic going to play out for the say versus Lufthansa versus say like a Ryanair, Wizz Air, like
Yeah, so the near term, as we mentioned, a carrier like Ryanair is going to be much better positioned than a carrier like Lufthansa. Lufthansa, as you alluded to, very, very premium. They might, I think they at one point said that they actually had more premium seats than any airline in the world in terms of what they scheduled. You can maybe a Singapore Airlines, Emirates, I don't know, but it was long haul intercontinental premium. And if you think about it, I mean, Germany is what is the third or fourth biggest economy in the world, and there's only really one airline. China and the U.S. are the two biggest economies in the world, and they each have a lot of airlines. So Germany really captures all that, or Lufthansa sort of captures all that demand from such a large corporate base and such a large economy. So that stuff, I mean, for Lufthansa to really be what it was, and let's, as an aside, it never really was a super profitable airline. It was a decently profitable airline at best. But for things to return that way, either, a couple different things have to happen. Either, that long haul premium has to come back, and it might. I mean, I think it probably will. It could take 2, 3, 4 years. Alternatively, what they're trying to do is, the Lufthansa has always tried to find a way to make sort of leisure, low cost, long haul, work for them, and they've always kind of stumbled through it. They German wings and Eurowings and this wings and that wings, and it's never really. It's been very messy. So they're going to try again to sort of reorganize everything. They're going to use this new sort of organizational design. They're calling Ocean Air, but it's not. I think it's Ocean. Is that what it's called? It's not. They're not going to use it as a brand. It's just kind of an internal name that they're using. And they're going to try to take some of the stuff they were flying, some long haul leisure with Brussels with the Brussels Airlines air operating certificate, and it was just a very messy from a organizational perspective, from a consumer perception. It's just very messy. So they're going to try to get that under control. Very hard though. This is it's a very large organization with high costs and a lot of expensive assets. The one thing that they do have potentially going for them is that they are kind of reworking all their labor contracts now. So there's a possibility that they can achieve something more akin to a cost structure that a Ryanair or Wizz Air, and it won't be that low. I mean, just make no mistake about that. But they could sort of become more competitive, and frankly, all the airlines are doing that too. And British Airways is doing it, and Iberia is going to do it, and Air France is going to do it. So everybody's kind of bringing their cost base down to adjust to what they expect to be a much lower demand environment. But yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be challenging. I mean, that's until that premium stuff comes back, it's tough, and they've got a lot of debt to pay back and to the government of Germany.
Let's pause there for a second, Jay. So in the last decade, or maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, it's always it's always easy to make fun of Lufthansa and its ever proliferating number of brands, right? And I can't keep them all straight, and I'm sure you can, but I can't. But in the last decade, the whole German wings, Eurowings. I mean, there was that whole confusion was a way for Lufthansa to bring down its labor costs because it had some very difficult negotiations with its unions back 5 years ago or so. And so this sort of reorganization or creation of new brands is a way to get around some of these tense, difficult negotiations. Are we seeing the same thing with Ocean or whatever it's called? Is this another sort of way to get around the unions, or is it or just to cut down on labor costs?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's different right now is that Lufthansa is just negotiating labor concessions just across the board. Just everywhere throughout, all of its subsidiary airlines, all of its business operating units, they're just everywhere. They're just, we need to be lower wages, more flexibility, whatnot. So that in that sense, it's different. I think what Ocean is specifically, I wouldn't really get too caught up in its significance, this larger significance. I think it's more of just an internal procedure to simplify their low cost operations. It's actually, I think, a lot of that stuff was going to be flown under the Eurowings brand still. I think they're going to incorporate some principles from, speaking of the, many operating brands that the group has. One of them in Switzerland is called Edelweiss, and Edelweiss is sort of a lower cost, lower frill carrier that operates long haul flights, and it's been relatively successful. They never really disclose, what its margins are or anything like that, but they always say it's been good, it's been successful. So they're going to try to replicate some of what worked there in Germany. There's of course competition matters. There's TUI is a big carrier in Germany that also offers long haul flights. Condor they were part of Thomas Cook, so they nearly went away, but they wound up getting a government bailout. Lot Polish agreed to buy them, and they backed out after the pandemic. Now there's talk that maybe TUI and Condor will get together. So what happens with that competitive landscape will also, determine whether Lufthansa can, make a go of it with some of these long haul, low cost flights. But it is just low cost long haul is just
who's made money with that?
Nobody.
Right. It's a tough business model, isn't it?
The business model is very, very tough. The economics are very, very tough, and that's kind of a separate discussion. Sure. We've kind of written many articles about that and stuff, but it's it's a hard business model.
Well, let's take this question from Mr. or Ms. Anonymous here, we've just on this podcast we've talked about the big three European carriers. We've touched on the Ryanairs and Wizz Airs and EasyJets, but this question is good. I mean, what is the future of second level carriers in Europe, like Swiss, SAS, TAP Air Portugal, Finnair, Alitalia, etc.?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, they're all, you sort of have to take each one separately. Swiss, first of all, is part of the Lufthansa group and extremely profitable. Switzerland is just such a wealthy country that they're just able to produce such enormous yields from Zurich in particular. And Zurich is not even that infested with low-cost carriers. Geneva is. Geneva's tough for Swiss, but Zurich is just such a profitable market. You can imagine flying all those bankers and pharmaceutical executives back and forth across the Atlantic and to Asia in normal times. So Swiss, they back in 2005 they were able to strike a deal with Lufthansa to take them over. So they're no problems there. SAS. That's a tough one. SAS is we always kind of think of them as a boat that's constantly taking on water, and they just they're always pumping out water, cutting costs, and the competitive environment in the Nordic region is going to be very different now because Norwegian is a completely different. They've totally changed their business. I won't say change their business model, but completely restructure their costs and their operating model. SAS is trying to do the same. So we'll see, what they're able to achieve with their unions, what they're able to, they're trying to negotiate concessions with pretty much all their stakeholders, anybody they owe money to, whether it be aircraft lessors or bondholders. So they may come out in a better place, in a more. But SAS's problem has always one of their kind of core problems is always that they have three hubs essentially, right. 3 subscale hubs. Mm-hmm. And the whole principle of economies of scope is you kind of want to amass all your at big assets in one big hub, unless you're a giant like Lufthansa can spread it out across different hubs, but or U.S. carrier, but even Lufthansa has issues making money in a place like Vienna or Brussels. So if you have Copenhagen, Stockholm, Oslo, they're not bad hubs, but they're not they can't support that much global traffic. There's not. So they have a very it's kind of split their they're sort of splitting up their strengths.
But politically, they wouldn't be able to. Politically, it'd be hard for them to pull off consolidating in, say, Copenhagen, right?
Yeah, because they are owned by the Swedish and Danish governments, and so that's politics is probably a non-starter. And even even if they were to just become a Copenhagen-centric carrier, that creates problems of its own because Copenhagen's really not that big, and then
Right.
you're going to have to get even smaller, and you have more. So SAS is it's not it's not a really great strategic position, but it does the region does have a lot of high fare business traffic in normal times, so they've been able to in a good year SAS will make a small decent mediocre margin and get by. I guess we're spending too much time on each airline, but yeah, in general, and then you have some of these other airlines that are very dependent on very specific overseas markets. I mean, TAP Air Portugal is all about Brazil. They've become a little more U.S. I mean, Brazil and some of the Portuguese-speaking African countries. Finnair is all about East Asia. They're just Helsinki is well positioned to do that. Alitalia,
that's a subject for a whole different. So more lives than a cat, that airline.
More lives than a cat.
But that's a subject for a whole different podcast. I think we could spend hours on Alitalia. But I'm
Spend a lot of money on Alitalia.
Yeah,
too.
well, everyone spent a lot of money on Alitalia, right? It's just it's a never-ending pit that money can be shoveled into. But Finnair and TAP are kind of interesting, right? I mean, Finnair in particular has that, as you mentioned, the strong presence in East Asia, which was hobbled early on in the pandemic. As naturally as the pandemic began in East Asia, are there signs that traffic is starting to come back? Is Finnair in a good place right now, or is it still has it staked its wagon to the wrong star?
Yeah, no, well, I wouldn't say that, but I mean, it's right now everything is still kind of dormant. There's still all sorts of travel restrictions, and there's just not that many people. I mean, there's a little bit of growth. Some people are traveling back and forth, but Finnair's they're basically a one-trick pony. It's Europe to Asia, so anywhere in Europe, whether it be it could be Germany, it could be France, whatever, flying to Japan especially, but also China, Korea, Singapore. Going through Helsinki is very convenient. It's a great hub for that. Geographically very well positioned, but you have to believe in the future of the Europe-Asia market for you to believe in Finnair. I mean, it really is it's a one-horse town. So, what's the future of that market? I mean, Europe-Asia. These are two giant economic centers of the world. There's sort of the larger question of what is China's future in the global economy? What is, a lot of, particularly between the U.S. and China, a lot of those trade links that really, define the economy of the last 20, 30 years are starting to unravel. And even, you see this even between Europe and a lot of the European countries and China, a lot of tensions, a lot of, threats to trade. Germany, we started, Germany incidentally is taking more of a, conciliatory approach to China. The relations are perhaps a little better there. But that's kind of another question about the long-term links or the long-term role of China in the global economy. But if for Finnair, if you believe that there's still a future in Europe-Asia travel, they're going to be okay. Yeah, and it is it's an airline that they have a lot of they got good government support in this during this crisis. They've always had a pretty good balance sheet. They've got new A350s that are good aircraft, and they were lucky too because they did not order any narrow bodies before the pandemic, and they're thinking about it. So now they can go in and do the order when they're ready, and probably get a great price because the aircraft market is so depressed right now.
Right. All right. Another question from Mr. or Ms. Anonymous here. Do you think Europe has too many airlines?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think so. I think it's different than the U.S. I mean, Europe still is very fragmented. There's of course been, in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of consolidation. But there are still all these kind of tiny little airlines or parts of airlines. I mean, Finnair is a good example. I mean, Finnair, because it has such a strong Asian network, it would ideally be part of something else, right? You can couple that with with a carrier that might have a great North Atlantic network, which is one reason why IAG has been kind of rumored partner for them for a long time. IAG and Finnair have a joint venture though. Does IAG want to take on the risk of buying it? That's another question. TAP Air Portugal too. I mean, there's always been, Lufthansa was before the pandemic, Lufthansa was reportedly very interested in buying TAP Air Portugal because you get yourself an awesome Brazilian network. But yeah, there are these like little sort of, one trick pony airlines and undersized airlines.
And then there are airlines like Romania's Tarom.
And then these, just real dysfunctional airlines that just, the state just keeps throwing money at them, and they're. I probably shouldn't say they're useless.
No, but the point is that there are a lot of small carriers that are struggling as well, like that one, right?
Right, and like Romania is a good example. And Wizz Air is just, they serve Romania, tremendous schedules from Romania, and Tarom or Tarom, whatever you call it. They don't even do any long haul. So they're basically doing the same exact thing as Wizz Air. And Wizz Air is just doing it 100 times better and more cost effective. So there are airlines like that. And then, your Air Maltas of the world, these just kind of very, very small airlines that serve, just the very limited purpose of bringing tourists to the home country or whatever. It makes consolidation is, of course, more difficult when you have national borders. Air Europa is a Spanish airline with a great Latin American network that IAG struck a €1 billion deal to buy before the pandemic. Now they still very much interested but want to renegotiate the price. So yeah, consolidation remains active. There was the Condor, situation we talked about before. SAS is an interesting one. Would anybody want to buy them? With Lufthansa, Lufthansa gets themselves if they were to buy SAS. I'm not talking about right now. Nobody has the appetite or even the permission to buy a lot. Like Lufthansa cannot, but because of their bailout, they can't buy any airlines right now. But let's just theoretically say in a couple of years they wanted to buy SAS. They get themselves in a very corporate rich Scandinavian network, but they get 3 undersized hubs that kind of look like they're Brussels hubs, which they've been struggling with for years. So
why not? Why not add to the number of brands they have?
Yeah, more the merrier.
But Jay, you're the person I know in this industry who comes closest to having a crystal ball, and so what? After 9/11 and the wave of bankruptcy, after 9/11, the U.S. industry went through a wave of bankruptcies, then a wave of consolidation. There was something similar that played out in Europe, but not quite to the same degree. But this is a crisis like no other. Do you think this crisis could be a catalyst for more consolidation in Europe?
Yeah, it could. Remember, you do already have 3 big groups that won't merge with each other. IAG, Air France, and Air France-KLM and Lufthansa Group are kind of 3 distinct. So if anything, it's going to be more like, in the U.S. we saw, American combined with U.S. Airways, 2 giant carriers, and Delta combined with Northwest, and United combined with Continental, and Southwest combined with Air Transat was a little smaller, but Virgin and Alaska were 2 very big airlines. It will be more, if it happens in Europe, it's more like, okay, Lufthansa wants to, buy a Finnair because they want more Asia exposure or something like that. Just kind of like add a little piece onto the puzzle type thing. It's so will that happen? And will this crisis kind of be a catalyst for more of that? It could be, but in a way, it's almost the opposite. Like the problem with consolidation is it's you need capital to do it. It's, with all these balance sheets and all these even government restrictions like we talked about in Germany, it does make it makes the appetite for mergers, or even as we said, the permission for merger. It's maybe now you're probably not going to see much of that now. I think you will see, IAG will probably get a good deal to buy Air Europa. There may be some other smaller opportunities. I don't know whether anybody will pick up Condor or something, but it would have to wait. Right now nobody wants to really. They have other things to deal with than a complicated merger. So you're talking. It would take some time.
Yeah, it would definitely take years. All right, we've got time for one last quick question. Let's answer this quickly. How has the cargo industry changed in Europe after the arrival of COVID?
Yeah, maybe you can speak more to that, Madhu. But obviously, the cargo capacity throughout the world is so much smaller now because all these planes are grounded. So these airlines carry, of course, cargo in the bellies of their passenger aircraft. So you have all these planes sitting on the ground. So that supply reduction combined with a real need for medical supplies, and everybody's working at home now. They're ordering computer equipment, and that stuff's coming from that's these global supply chain stuff is coming from all over the world. So you have these carriers like Korean Air, which and Asiana, which are two very cargo heavy. They're passenger airlines, but very cargo heavy. 25% of their revenue in normal times comes from cargo. They actually made, those are the only two airlines in the world that actually made money last quarter because the cargo yields were so enormous. They were just so profitable. And I know your questions about Europe. Lufthansa, their cargo operation made a lot of money last quarter. Wasn't enough to offset the passenger stuff, but it's just a very robust times. I don't know whether you have to imagine that will cool off. As planes come back,
Right.
And as the pandemic eases, you would think that this is more of a temporary phenomenon, but it could stay strong for some time.
Right. Cargo yields are up, sort of reversing a years long decline as trade tensions took a bite out of global commerce. The pandemic.
Yeah, just a year ago, we were just before this, we were talking about this pandemic. We're talking about how all the trade wars and the decoupling of the Chinese and U.S. economy, all that kind of stuff, were actually big problem for cargo.
Absolutely. And so the yields are up, but when more passengers start flying again, more capacity is thrown back in the system, yields will go down again. So
is it 12:30 already? We didn't even get to Copa.
We didn't. So we got to stop this here, Jay. We'll pick it up again after our hiatus. We are on break.
Sounds
Airline
good.
Weekly's last issue this summer is August 17th, and that's our last podcast, and we will be back off after Labor Day, the Tuesday after Labor Day. So, Jay, I want to thank you again for this great discussion.
And, thanks, Madhu. Thanks to everybody listening.
And thank you to all our listeners. We'll have a replay of this on our site later today, and we will be distributing the audio as a podcast on iTunes and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to drop me a line at mu@skift.com and check out our website, airlineweekly.com. Goodbye.